Hey, good morning. It's Monday, November 2nd. Tomorrow is Tuesday, November 3rd. Uh, Kind of an interesting day. If we're thinking of the Psalms, the thought of perhaps walking in the valley of darkness, of deep darkness, in the valley of the shadow of death might come to mind when you think about this election. And that helped me to think about those ideas in my head. It began to help me think about Psalm 23 and the translation there that says, even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we will fear no evil, for you're with me. Your rod and staff comfort me. And I've opted for the newer translations, which say, even though I walk in the darkest valley or the valley of deep darkness, because the idea of the valley of the shadow of death has been associated with funerals and relegating Psalm 23 to funerals. And we don't want that because Psalm 23 is for the living, for the day, for right now. Its primary application is not something to be read at a funeral. Its primary application is to be lived in the middle, in the milieu of life, clinging to the presence of God because He is our comfort. But in reading Dale Ralph Davis's commentary on Psalm 23, I was given a very pleasant and much needed rebuke. It was really, like the Proverbs say, the words of the wise are healing, especially when we're off. And Davis argues that this translation of the valley of the shadow of death is actually a very good one for us. Let me read you what Davis says. We come to the place of Christ's clearer presence. This is the valley of the shadow of death. There is some debate over the word translated shadow of death. Some prefer something like deep darkness. But the figure, that is, shadow of death, is reasonably clear. The ravines of Israel cut by wadis at the bottom could be treacherous to descend and arduous to climb and could harbor wild animals. All in all, a sheep's worst nightmare. So this valley signals life-threatening, fear-generating situations for the Lord's flock. And yet we must remember, as Derek Kidner reminds us, that the valley of the shadow of death is also one of the paths of righteousness. And that was just brought such clarity and comfort to me. Yes, there are valleys of deep darkness, but we really do feel that edge of the valley of the shadow of death. It's real because there's evil in the world. And there's evil in the paths that we take. And so we do feel that presence of death around us as we walk along life's way. When we put our hope in people and princes and leaders and governments, we really are in the valley of the shadow of death. If we're hoping in this election tomorrow to be the indication of whether or not God is faithful to us, we misunderstand. God's faithfulness is not dependent upon the outcome of the election. However treacherous this valley is, and who knows, it may even take more than a day or two to figure out who won, God's faithfulness remains. He is our hope. He is our security. So yes, this phrase, valley of the shadow of death, is actually a very good one for us. Because even though there's the threatening issues of man where we trust men and not God, God is there with us by His very presence. Davis goes on to comment, it is through the trouble in the valley that drives the shepherd closer, drives us closer to the shepherd, and brings a deeper intimacy with Him. How often have we not found this to be so? It is not that Christ is closer in the valley, but that we realize in the valley how close He has always been. See, David in Psalm 23 reminds us that God's presence is always there. He is our shepherd. We truly have no need of anything. We lack everything we need to serve God. So maybe you'll be encouraged with me this morning by this fresher look of an old translation, but actually a good understanding. God is with us in the valley of the shadow of death. And that shadow of death is not just when the grave happens. That shadow of death is where we walk every day. And where we walk every day, we are held in the grasp of our shepherd. He will be with us. And that, brothers and sisters, is a place of comfort and joy. So think about that this morning. Be encouraged by the faithfulness of God. You have a great day, and Lord willing, we'll be back tonight. Lord bless. Bye-bye.